Hi. This is during the war, and I hope I am more clear this time, or at least helpful. Okay, so I divide this into sections to make this a little bit more clear and helpful. I actually don't know what this says. Initial war. I actually don't know what that means, but this is the initial war. So the Schlieffen plan, thought that Russia would take a while to get ready to fight, and Germany would defeat the French in like 6 weeks, and they ignored the British because they thought that they were a small threat. But that was a lie, obviously. Originally, the Germans attacked, walking through Belgium, and Britain and France obviously retaliated to that. Meanwhile, the Russians over in Russia were advancing like faster and stronger than most everyone thought. And the French pushed the Germans back and created trenches. So that was the beginning of trenches, which leads to weaponry involved in the war. So weaponry-wise, there was trench warfare. Obviously, you know about that. I'm not even going to talk about it because all quiet. People froze to death or, like, burned. Not really, literally, but, like, the weather was awful. Not the weather, but the conditions. Then there were, like, lice, rats, whatever. The main weapons were machine guns, and they were fired over the trenches, so it was really hard to get out of the trenches. The Germans introduced mustard gas, and in the flamethrower. And aviation was actually really new, like not even 15 years old, but they did introduce fighter planes. So that's a thing. Tanks were a thing, but they'll become a thing later. Next. Battles. Okay, so Germany and Austria, both together tried to knock out Russia because Russia sucks. So I suppose they thought it'd be easiest, and it kind of was because Russian losses were awful and like 2 million people were captured or wounded or whatever. But they still kept fighting. But Britain and France were disturbed by this, seeing as they were on France's side. So they tried to steal the Straits of Dardanelles and Gibraltar. Actually, no, it's probably not Gibraltar. The Straits by the Ottoman Empire. They tried to steal them from Constantinople to help Russia during this time, which is the Battle of This is the battle that it was, and I'll write it down. That's the name of the battle, and that is the battle that they tried to take the Straits, and it went horribly, and it was a really embarrassing, like devastating loss for the British. And then the action turned to France, where there were 2 main battles, the Battle of Verdun and the Battle of the Somme. There were huge losses on both sides, hundreds of thousands, and the British introduced the tank at this time in the Battle of the Somme or whatever, but it was in such a small number because it was new that it was kind of ineffective, but they'd become a thing later in the war. Oceans is our next topic. Nothing was going well on land, so everyone looked to the sea for help. People were having issues with contraband versus non-contraband warfare. Contraband meaning that, contraband warfare consisting of weapons and ammunition and like other warish products, and then non-contraband was like food, medical supplies, and other like humanitarian things. And the British refused to acknowledge any difference, which is basically an excuse to be assholes. And But so they didn't allow any ships to go to German ports. So they basically cut off all the Germans from supplies, and all the neutral countries were against this action. The Germans developed the submarine, which was terrifying. And okay, Ellie knows about this, but in 1915, there was an American passenger ship named the Lusitania that I'm going to also write down. So there's a German passenger ship named that. No, it wasn't. Okay, a German submarine sank a British passenger ship named that thing. So it killed 1,200 people, but also, like, the most significant part of that was it killed a bunch of American people. So America was all abuzz about that, because they're like, oh, the Germans, you're blowing up our passenger ships. So Woodrow Wilson, who was the president at the time, was adamantly against this. So that toned down submarine warfare for 2 years, but this kind of involved America for the first time in the war, so that's important. And then everyone's losing. This is this transition where everyone's failing at everything. So this is basically where Italy changes sides. The Allies promised them the Dalmatian Islands and then like more African territory. So through the Treaty of London, Italy switched sides to the Allies. Both of the sides attempted to like win the favor of minor countries that don't matter to help their causes. The U.S. relations with Mexico were not good at the time, so the German Secretary of State Alfred Zimmermann sent a telegram to the Mexican government that promised them return of like their lost land in exchange for an alliance. But the British found this telegram and they decoded it and published it, trying to make the Americans like them, which I suppose worked. But after this, blah blah blah. Okay, I think this is a new section. Is this a new section? No, it's not. Okay. Okay, there's this place in eastern Turkey, like which was close to the Russian border, where the Armenian Christians lived. So the Turkish government was scared of how close they were to Russia, so they ordered for the removal of this group of the Armenian Christians for relocation, but the results of this attempt to move them was this giant disaster where like thousands of people were raped and lost and starved and killed and stuff, so they were dislocated people, and that's just kind of random, but like probably important. Okay, so during this time, German land was stolen by the British. Like the British stole. I just said the word stole. I just said it. So the British stole German colonies in Africa, and Japan stole German colonies in the Pacific. So Germany was not okay with that. And then also Japan, Japan was all fancy, and during this time they're taking over China subtly. So they forced on them the 21 demands, which I actually don't know what they demanded, but they demanded harsh things. And that was a question on my practice test. So Japan forced the 21 demands on China during this time. Okay, then after this, there were a lot of people that were just getting tired of this war, and they're like, let's end the war. But no one did, because the people that said let's end the war were slowly growing out of power, and it didn't matter, because Germany had a bigger military than all of those people. Okay. Russia. Because after everyone... Hi, I'm doing a video. Don't laugh at me. Okay, so after this time, that everyone's like, let's end the war, and then they didn't end the war. There are two things that changed everything. One is the withdrawal of Russia, and two is the entry of the United States. So, Russia. So everything, the war was really expensive, and Russia is poor and has too many people, and like at home there was there were a lot of pressure. There was a lot of pressure for domestic reformation, and just like there was a lot of Bolshevik uprisings and whatever. So Russia had problems at home. So Nicholas II abdicated, and he was succeeded by Alexander Kerensky. And under Alexander Kerensky's rule, they tried to continue the war, but it's summarized in the motto of the Soviets, which was peace, land, and bread. So they wanted peace, land, and bread rather than war. So clearly war was not going to be a very successful thing. So the Tsar collapsed, and the Germans smuggled in Lenin into Russia. And under Lenin, the Bolsheviks took over the government, and we all know where it goes from there. And the official treaty that cut off Russia from the rest of the war was called the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk, which I am going to write down because I can't pronounce anything. I can't pronounce. That is this treaty. And after this, after Russia, is the involvement of the United States. Yes. So, the Allies were really weak, and they were just kind of like hanging in there, waiting for the U.S. to involve themselves. Yes, so before this, the U.S. had stayed out of the war, except for they'd loaned a ton of money to the Allies. But in April, the thing that kind of brought the United States into the war was the Germans renewing the submarine warfare, which was not a soft spot, but just like a sensitive issue for the U.S. because the German submarine had blown up the American ship, well, the British ship with American citizens on it. So when that happened, America was like, no. So the United States declared war, and the big, like, home propaganda thing was like making the world safe for democracy, which is the excuse for every foreign war in modern times, it seems. So yeah, the Allies were really weak, and they tried to wait for the U.S. And during this time, I've said that a lot of times during this time, but Germany poured back into the Western Front after they agreed with Russia that Russia was no longer a part of the war, and they were successful at first, but Germany was, like, at home, it was not good. There was, like, really high inflation and really bad, like, severe rationing, and there were a lot of revolts and things, so Germany was weak, and the U.S. came in all fresh and new and fancy and scary. So that was kind of the end of everything. Basically, a lot of the people backed out. William II abdicated. The Austrian Emperor abdicated. Austria was declared a republic. Hungary was also declared a republic. And Germany began forming a new government in the city of Weimar. And that's the end of everything. And there was a transition between USA and end, but I forgot to do it, so there it is. Finally, the aftermath. This isn't the aftermath. This is like the aftermath of the middle, because I suck at making videos. But, yeah, 10 million people died in this war, and 20 million people were wounded. All the great powers, except for Italy and the U.S., because they didn't really do anything. I mean, the U.S. did, but at the end. They lost 1 to 2 million people. The world was terrified of Bolshevism, threatened by the influenza, which actually killed more people after the war than died during the war. And in a lot of places, there was threats of revolution. The Jews really, really wanted a homeland, and Japan was advancing into China. So all these bad things were happening. So the nations met at Versailles in January 1918 to begin the peace settlement negotiation.